Record to this computer. Let's see whether that's actually worked or not. Yeah, it's worked. Okay, great. So to start off, I'm just going to introduce Professor Jude Capper, and she came to us recently to actually be interviewed to be a liveryman. I wasn't part of the interview, but having read Jude's interview or her interview notes and indeed her application, I think probably it's fair to say I don't think I've read a more impassioned application to be part of the livery, which is wonderful. And I'll actually take some excerpts of that just as I introduce her, because I think some of them are really, really, really important and actually things that we can all take something from. So Jude splits her time at the moment between being an independent livestock sustainability consultant based in Oxfordshire, and also now is the professor of the ABP chair in sustainable beef production at Harper Adams University, and an organisation that the livery has huge links with. And she took up that post in May 2021. Jude is an alma mater of Harper Adams as well, and has done a bachelor's and a PhD in ruminant nutrition and behaviour at Harper, and then followed by a postdoctoral career in America. Now back in the UK, Jude's research focus is on modelling of sustainability of livestock production systems, specifically for dairy and beef, and she's currently working on projects which relate to South American beef production, on-farm medicines use, and the impacts of livestock health and welfare system sustainability. One of her professional goals that she spoke about in her interview and in her application is to communicate the importance of the factors that affect the livestock industry sustainability, and to enhance knowledge and understanding for food production stakeholders, from the farmer right through to the retailer or policymaker and consumer. And she feels that the livery is a really excellent way to gather lots of like-minded people together to communicate all of that information, and to actually all work towards a common goal. And she did say in her application that she felt that she would be honoured to use the combination of scientific training and communication and leadership to help enhance the reputation of the company and the industry, which I think is a great thing to want to work towards. Jude sits on the National Beef Association Board, chair of the Root Panel for Agriculture, Environment and Animal Care, and is vice chair of the Green Apprenticeships Advisory Panel. And a lot of people might already be aware that she has a active social media presence at Bovadiva, and spends quite a lot of time, I think, when you see how active you are, Jude, on Twitter particularly, debunking some of the more commonly heard myths. I don't know how you have the energy for it, to be honest, but it's great that you do. And to this end, she was awarded the Women in Dairy Industry Woman of the Year 2017, Farmer's Guardian Farming Hero of the Year 2018. She's an associate member of the Royal Agricultural Society in 2018. You've got an honorary doctorate as well from Harper Adams in recognition of her contribution to the livestock industry. And now you're going to be a liveryman of the Worshipful Company of Butchers, which I think probably is the cherry on the top of that enormous pile of icing. As well as all of her amazing commitments already, is that she's also extremely passionate about working with the future generation of people in the food industry, and is extremely keen to work with young butchers and apprentices, and to help educational programs to inspire the future roles of people in the food industry. So I think it's absolutely really apt that Jude is here today to talk to the young butchers and to other liverymen and associates as well. So I really thank you, Jude, and hope that wasn't too much of an introduction, but there's a lot to cover.
Thank you so much. I think I'm going to have to tone down my bio because it sets a certain expectation level, doesn't it? Which I feel like I'm just going to have to say Jude tweets a bit and has done a bit of research, because then at least the bar will be low for whatever else I'm going to say. So yeah, it is an absolute pleasure to talk to you guys. I'm just going to see if I can share my screen. Oh, Claire, could you possibly enable participant screen sharing? I always get confused between Zoom and Teams and Google Meet and all the many and various things we've got now in terms of, there we go, awesome. So hopefully you can see a picture of a cow. Yeah. Okay. Fabulous. I'm going to minimize all the little thumbnails and things. So if anything does go wrong, please, send me a chat message or something. But so as Claire said, I am extremely passionate about this. I could honestly talk about this for about the next 3 weeks without drawing breath. And I'm conscious that we're time limited. So I'm going to do my best to take you on a little bit of a whistle-stop tour through beef and lamb sustainability within the UK as I see it, in terms of where we are now, where our challenges are, where our opportunities are, and sort of in contrast to the popular rhetoric out there, I am going to talk about all of the types of sustainability, not just greenhouse gas emissions, which is where we often tend to focus. But part of the reason behind that is I'm conscious that all of you, whether as young butchers or as more experienced members of the livery, often get those questions. And whether it's questions from friends and family, whether it's questions from others in the industry, whether it's questions from processors and customers as to just how sustainable is UK livestock production. So my aim is to give you also some sort of facts and figures and little bits of information so that when you do get challenged, and unfortunately we do get more and more challenges every single day, you've got some things to some points to put across so we can get our messages out there. Having said that, I'm very conscious that there will be lots of things that I won't have time to cover and lots of questions that you'll come across. So I'll give you my contact details at the end, but please feel free at any point to get in touch and say, someone's just asked me this and I've got no idea how to respond. Have you got any data? And if I don't, then obviously I'll try to pass you on to somebody that does. I also have to apologise if I look at a little bit black and blue, it's because I've got a broken nose from rugby last week. I don't normally look quite so multicoloured as I do today, so apologies for that. So as I say, this is something that I am really, 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 really passionate about. I've been working in this area for about 15 years now, and it is my true belief that there's no one size fits all. There is no, this is definitive animal protein production. So whether it's, for example, Jersey cows in New Zealand, whether it's outdoor pigs, whether it's beef in the Highlands of Scotland, whether it's goats, whether it's sheep in Oxfordshire, there is no one size fits all. There is no, this is the ideal system, because it honestly doesn't matter whether it's a big or a small farm, where it's located, what the breed is. All of these things are, to a certain extent, irrelevant, because there's no one size fits all. And the way that every farm or every herd or every flock can be sustainable will be individual to that farm. So we can't be prescriptive in terms of saying you must have cattle finished at this age, or you must have this particular breed of sheep, or you can only be sustainable if you have up to 200 cattle, 500 cattle, 1,000 cattle, because all of the challenges and all of the opportunities are going to vary depending where the farm's located, on the resources, on the climate, on the market, on the labour, all of these factors. So there is, as I say, no definitive one size fits all. Excuse me. But what we do know is that overall, when we talk about this sort of S word that's become so popular, every media article, every restaurant, every menu has something to say about sustainability. And we do know that overall it's a balance. So it's a balance between three things, and that's environmental responsibility, it's economic viability, and it's social acceptability. And back when I first began doing work in this, I was all about the environment, all about the greenhouse gas emissions, none of the rest of it really mattered. And I've grown to see over the past 15 years or so, while we've been talking about all of these aspects, that not only the economic, but primarily the social have become really, really important. And we've only had to see how things like Twitter and Facebook and Snapchat and Instagram have really, really grown in popularity and have changed how people communicate and think and talk, that we can see how that has an impact on the foods that we enjoy and the foods that we buy. And so this balance between environmental, economic and social is then under the auspices of One Health. And so that's health for animals, health for the ecosystem, and health for people as well. So all of these things have to balance. It's really quite a juggling act to try and be sustainable. And as I say, how we do that absolutely varies according to that farm, to that operation. But as I say, from a social point of view, generally, when we talk about this, people talk about carbon footprints, they talk about greenhouse gases, and there's huge variation in carbon footprints, but we also got an awful lot of bad press as an industry with an awful lot of livestock. So this is just a graphic that I got from Instagram. For example, I have several issues with it, but for example, it's comparing nuts with lentils, with beans, with cow milk, pork, cheese, turkey, etc. And as you can see, as we go down this graph towards the bottom, there's beef and lamb with the highest greenhouse gas emissions. Now, I have two main issues with this. The biggest one is that these are global averages. Global averages, quite frankly, are absolutely meaningless. You know, I'm 5'6", which is roughly average for females in the UK. The global average height is about 5'4" for women. Does that mean I'm tall? No, not at all. So if we use a global average to talk about things that we do on a regional basis, i.e. the foods that we eat, you know, the global average carbon footprint of eggs may be 3.1, but I eat eggs from the farm down the road. Are they higher? Are they lower? And the other thing is, if you know on the infographic, it's kilos of carbon per 1,000 calories. And yet there are foods that we just eat 4 calories. But when we eat beef, when we eat lamb, tuna, turkey, pork, cheese, chicken, all of these have a high protein content. And so when we look at animal source foods, things like milk, meat and eggs, we shouldn't be doing it on a calorie basis. That biases the data. We've got to look at it on a protein basis, because that's why we look at, that's why we eat these foods. So as I say, when we look at carbon footprints across the globe, they really vary. So this is some data that came out from the FAO, the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations. It came out back in 2013 now, but the same trends still hold true. And as you can see, there's a wide range in the carbon footprint in terms of greenhouse gas emissions per kilo of dead weight beef. So we're going all the way from Eastern Europe at about 15 kilos of carbon per kilo of dead weight, Western Europe, where we are, at about 18, North America at 29, all the way up to Latin America at 73. So huge variation. And so when we look at that world average of 47 kilos of carbon per kilo of dead weight, Western Europe is doing pretty well, obviously, but we've got that huge variation. And that's why any sort of global average for beef or pork or chicken or any other meat means absolutely nothing. We can't use those global averages to talk about something that's inherently regional. But even on a local basis, we see wide variations. This is data that came out from AHDB. They looked at the carbon footprints of both beef and lamb, with the lowest carbon footprint in the green bars, the highest in the yellow bars, and the average in blue. And as you can see, there's really wide variation. So in terms of beef, for example, it's going all the way from about 6 kilos of carbon per kilo of dead wheat all the way up to 55. So we've got huge opportunities there, because if the differences in the bars is really, really big, that means there's lots of difference between systems. Therefore, we have those opportunities. If we had much narrower gaps between the bars, then we can't change that much. So the positive here is that we all have opportunities to improve, to cut those carbon footprints. And if we cut the carbon footprint, we obviously have a lesser effect on climate change, but also we have a really positive PR story to tell the consumer. So briefly, because this is about as technical as I'm going to get, how do we do that? Well, it doesn't matter whether we're talking about cattle or sheep or pigs or poultry, any meat or milk producing species across the world, if we improve productivity and we improve efficiency. So for example, if we improve growth rate, i.e. the kilos of beef or lamb that the animal gains per day, if we improve meat yield, i.e. the carcass yield per animal, to produce a set amount of meat takes fewer total livestock and or less total time. So if we need less cattle, for example, to make a set amount of beef and it takes less time, then we save land, we save water, we save fossil fuels, and we have a lower greenhouse gas emissions per kilo of beef. And from an economic point of view, we should see lower costs of production, both to the producer, but also to the processor and the retailer. And those savings can be passed on to the consumer. So we see really positive correlations between improved efficiency, improved productivity, lower resource use, and a lower cost, which can be passed on. So to give you one example of that, this is some work that we did at the National Beef Association last year, and we were simply looking at the impact of cutting the average age at slaughter, because in the UK at the moment, we have a big peak in the number of animals that are slaughtered at about 27 or 28 months. And if we brought that down by just a month, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months. So in this example, nothing changes apart from the age at slaughter. So animals are born at about 40 kilos, slaughtered at 670 kilos. So therefore the total gain they put on over that time is 630 kilos. All that differs here is that the age at slaughter is 27 months in the left-hand bar or 30 months in the right-hand bar. That means that animals that are slaughtered at 27 months grow faster, but they need less overall feed, because you've basically saved 3 months of having to maintain those animals, giving them enough feed just to keep them alive, breathing and healthy. And that means less feed, less land and a lower carbon footprint. And there's also that opportunity cost as well. If we can finish animals earlier, maintaining the same quality, then we free up all of these resources to potentially have more cattle on that land that we freed up, and therefore we can cut imports to a certain amount. So we have all of these opportunities simply in terms of improving productivity, improving efficiency. But as I say, how we do that will entirely depend on that farm, because what you do with an extensive system, you know, grazing dexters in Devon, for example, will be very, very different to an intensive operation that finishes bull calves from dairy. But in any beef system, indeed any lamb or pork system as well, if we improve feed efficiency, so better growth per kilo of feed that goes into the animal, if we improve growth rate per day, if we improve meat yield per animal, if we think about the animals in the background herds, so the suckler cows with beef or the ewes with lamb, for example, if we improve reproduction, if the ewes or the cows are more maternal, and if they live longer, all of these things feed in. And of course, animal health is absolutely paramount. Consumers want to be assured that all of the food that they eat comes from healthy, high welfare animals. And we have a really positive story to tell in the UK in terms of health, low antibiotic use, traceability, and very, very high welfare. And of course, pasture quality for any pasture-based system is extremely important. So all of these things play a role. There is no, as I say, one size fits all. There is no silver bullet where if you just feed X, or if you just have a Dexter or a Holstein cross, that's the answer. Every system has opportunities if we improve productivity, efficiency, and health and welfare. And this is going to be incredibly important going forward, because as we've seen over the last 10 or 15 years, consumers are thinking more about this. They're asking more questions. It's out there in the popular press every single day. So in future, I think, we won't just see the type of labels we've seen in the past with, you know, carbohydrate, protein, salt, fat, etc. We'll see all sorts of other things. We'll see label claims. We'll see certification programs. We'll have to give people more information about sustainability, about carbon footprints, water footprints, antibiotic uses, and how that farm supports the local and the regional community as well. And we're probably going to have some sort of QR codes for webcam data, metrics of sustainability and so on. So we've got to have more traceability. We have got to be more transparent to the consumer. And that doesn't mean showing absolutely everything that we ever do in a farm or in an abattoir, but we've got to be more transparent to show to the consumer that we're doing better and better and better every single day, every single year. Because really, we do face a challenge, and I know you all know this, but this is a picture of my daughter. We were in Dublin, and she would be 3 at this point, eating a burger almost as big as her head. But our biggest challenge is to keep meat in the diets of our kids, our nephews and nieces, and the future generation. You know, that is the biggest thing, because we've certainly seen a rise in interest in veganism, vegetarianism, flexitarianism, as I'll come on to in just a second. And that really is our biggest overall challenge. And I'm always surprised when I talk in different areas of the world. I think that people are going to ask me really awkward questions about, you know, meat production in South Africa or Chile, and everybody is facing this same issue. You know, how do we keep people eating meat in the next generation? Well, what we always have to think about is there's a sort of popular belief out there that only meat has an environmental impact or any other impact. And of course, everything we eat, in fact, everything we do has some environmental impact. Now, I'm such a complete nerd that if you look carefully, these foods are ordered from A through to Z, because I made the slide when I was in the States. So it goes from apples for A to zucchini for Z, with the only exception being X. I couldn't find a food for X. But whether we're talking about ice cream or hot dogs or quiche or a cup of tea, you know, everything we ever eat has some environmental impact. And we do face a little bit of a danger if we just focus on carbon, because we've got to think about other things as well: land use, biodiversity, water use, pollution, air quality, etc., etc. At the moment, it's very clear that the focus is on carbon and carbon and carbon. So if we think about carbon emissions in the UK from a livestock point of view, this is some data from about 2 years ago now, but you'll almost always see an article, primarily in The Guardian, I have to admit, saying the biggest thing that you can do to cut your individual carbon footprint is to cut your meat intake. You know, don't eat beef, don't eat lamb. If you must eat meat, eat pork or eat chicken. Well, on a national basis, if we look at the actual data from the Department of Energy and Climate Change, UK meat and dairy production, including crops going into livestock, only accounts for about 7% of our total national carbon footprint. So that means that the other 93% comes from everything else that we do, you know, from cars, from industry, from hospitals and hotels and shops and so on and so on. So UK meat and dairy only accounts for about 7%. And that's why on a national basis, even if we all gave up meat and dairy for 1 day per week, it would cut our national carbon footprint by less than 1%. So there's often a supposition that if you don't eat the beef burger and instead you have the tofu burger, for example, you're doing a really good thing for carbon. Yes, you'll make a difference, but as I say, there's about 66 million people in the UK at the moment. If all of us gave up meat and dairy every Monday, let's say, it would cut the carbon footprint of the UK by less than 1%. We can't make a massive difference simply by giving up meat, by giving up dairy. But if you look at the popular press, that isn't what we hear. So every January, we have Veganuary, and you have to take your hat off to the guys that came up with this in the first place. It is really, really clever, because let's face it, every January, just after Christmas, just after New Year, we've all eaten too much. We haven't exercised because it's cold and wet. New gym memberships go up by about 75% because everybody just feels, you know, too old, too overweight, too much alcohol. I'm going to be new, I'm going to be shiny, I'm going to go running, it's going to be amazing, I'm going to do a half marathon, you know, yay. And by February, we've all gone back to drinking beer and eating cheese. And well, I did go running, but it hurt my feet, so I'm not going to do it again. You know, so this is perfectly poised to take advantage of that. So the premise of Veganuary is that if you give up meat for a month, and dairy and eggs as well, because this is basically based on going vegan for the whole month, you can make a huge difference for the animals, for the planet, for your health, etc., etc. And to be fair to them, this year there were over 582,000 people who signed up. Now, the first point to make about this is 582,538 people is a significant number of people. Now, that's loads of people. But those are the people who signed up to do this on the 1st of January. We don't know how many were still doing it by the 2nd of January, or the 15th of January, or the 31st of January. But to put it into context, 582,000 people is slightly smaller than the population of Sheffield. So it's a lot of people. It's not New York, it's not LA, it's not London. You know, it's a relatively small amount of people in context. And if they were all in the UK, they comprise less than 1% of our UK population. Now, they're not, in fact, they're spread over 193 countries, which gives an average of 2,787 per participating country. I apologise, there's my phone ringing. But I couldn't find a single hobby or pastime that only had 2,787 people who took it up per country. And perhaps most importantly, of those 582,000 people, almost 2/3 of them were already vegetarian, vegan, or pescatarian, i.e. they don't eat meat, but they do eat fish. And, you know, I'm probably a little bit biased. Well, I am quite biased. But if you are already vegan and you sign up to Veganuary, I mean, that's like me going, I'm going to play rugby and break my nose. You know, that is just normal life. That's not making a massive change. So there's no doubt that every January we are going to be hammered in the press. But I think putting it into context, this isn't the whole world going vegan, you know, and there's some sort of indications out there that perhaps we have hit sort of peak vegan, as it were, certainly in people over about the age of 18 or so. But there was some really nice data that came out just as we went into lockdown last year. And it's interesting because until this point, as I say, almost every news article ever said the biggest thing you can possibly do to cut your personal carbon footprint, make a difference, you know, make life better for our kids and grandkids is to give up meat and dairy. You know, that's the biggest impact you can have. This paper that came out from the Centre for Research into Energy Demand Solutions actually showed by a meta-analysis of all the data out there that actually on an individual basis, you've got the top 10 here, the top 6 have nothing to do with diet. They are to do with giving up your car or having a battery car, taking one less long-haul return flight per year, taking up renewable energy, public transport, or refurbing and renovating houses and buildings. Having a vegan diet came in at number 7. There were further issues with this that I could go into. I don't have time now, but interestingly, having a vegan diet in terms of your carbon footprint reduction came in equal to giving up your family pet. And I suspect there's an awful lot of people who would find it a really hard choice to give up their cat or dog versus going vegan. So it would be interesting to see how that would balance out. But I'd like to focus on the one less flight, because obviously in the past 12 months or so, we have seen significant changes to our lives. And back last May, for example, there were 95 fewer flights going in and out of Heathrow compared to the same week the previous year. So in terms of flights, just before COVID hit last year, I had the pleasure of going to Australia and to talk at a dairy conference. And of course, I knew that any flight that I took had a carbon footprint, but I never quantified it and I'd never put it into context. So being a complete data nerd, what I did was to look at the carbon footprints of different flights per passenger and to put that into context of eating kilos of beef based on the average carbon footprint of beef in the UK. So for example, if you fly to Paris, Charles de Gaulle, that's equal on a carbon basis to eating 7.2 kilos of beef. And as another point of comparison, the average annual UK consumption of beef is about 18 kilos. So if you fly to New York and back, that's 51 kilos of beef as a comparator. So that's basically like if you take that flight and obviously fly back, that's like 3 years average worth of beef consumption. And if you fly to Sydney, like I did, that flight I took there and back was equal to 9 years worth of beef comparison, of beef consumption. And that really put it into context for me. You know, it just, pardon the pun, blew me away, you know, because we know that all of our actions have consequences, but when they're put into context like that, it just makes us stop and think. So is the future vegan? The data seems to say no. This was a survey that came out from YouGov back in 2019 now. The question they asked was, is the future of food flexitarian? 81% of people were either meat eaters or pescatarians, 3% were vegetarian, 1% were vegan, but 15% were flexitarian. And this is an interesting one because it's not a prescriptive definition. There's no real, you must eat this or you mustn't eat that, or you must only eat beef on a Tuesday or dairy on a Thursday, you know? So what it seems to mean is making a conscious effort to eat a little bit less meat. Whether that means 99% less or 2% less depends on the individual, their preferences, their circumstances, etc. But that gives us opportunities as well, because if people are going to eat a bit less, but they eat better, higher quality British beef and lamb, for example, that isn't necessarily a threat to our industry. But what is a threat from a social sustainability point of view is that in the same survey, they asked people who were either a meat eater or a flexitarian at the moment, but were thinking of giving up meat, whether they felt guilty when they ate meat and dairy. Now, in the national population, 25% felt guilty, but of the people who were thinking of giving up meat, 2/3 of them, 66% did feel guilty when they ate meat, when they ate dairy. So we've got to overcome that guilt factor. We've got to help people to feel better about not feeling guilty just because they choose the cheeseburger or they choose the pork chop. You know, we've got to overcome that. So one of the ways we can do that, just to give you a little bit of the sort of data to talk back about the bad news stories. This is an infographic that I got from Instagram. It came out from the campaign for Meatless Mondays. And unfortunately, as people, we are a little bit like lemmings. You know, we tend to follow the crowd and we are pre-programmed to believe bad news stories. And quite frankly, I think that's why the Daily Mail still exists, because it's always about the bad news. But from a science point of view, we do know that we need 5 positive stories out there every time to overcome the sort of tidal wave of negative information that we often get about animal agriculture. So we see infographics like this that said livestock production uses 75% of the Earth's agricultural land. And that seems shocking. You know, it seems crazy that we use that much. It can't be true, etc., etc. And of course, it is true, but in context, that's because we can't grow anything else on that land. You know, if any of you have been out to Montana, for example, where I lived for 3 years, you know, it is very poor quality grassland. It's very, very, very dry. The grass that does grow there is very sparse, low nutritional quality. You have to have about 25 acres per cow. So yes, livestock use an awful lot of land, but we can't do anything else with that land. And even in the UK, for example, I saw this data over and over again, and frankly, I didn't think it could be possibly true. But 2/3 of our land in the UK and 89% of the land in Scotland isn't suitable for growing arable crops. So the only thing we can do with it in an effective way to maintain our national food production is to put a grazing livestock on it, cattle, sheep, goats, deer, etc. And the other thing that I wish that consumers were more aware about, there's a sort of perception out there that we take cattle and sheep and we pump them full of, you know, corn and soy, and we cut down the rainforest every single day. The animal industry uses huge amount of byproducts, whether it's waste donuts, byproducts from beer or whiskey production, whether it's stubble turnips or cannery waste. We use so many things that would otherwise go into landfill to feed 2 animals, to make safe, affordable, nutritious, wholesome milk, meat and eggs all the time. And if we could just get that through to the consumer, that livestock effectively were recycling far, far before any of us were thinking about doing that on a household basis. So we have some really positive things that we can talk about to the consumer. And I believe that we should talk about to the consumer. I don't believe it's somebody else's job. You know, if we work in the animal agriculture industry, if we work in butchery, if we work in processing, retail, anything to do with the meat industry, I think we all have to be involved and we all have to talk about these things. So just to end on one last myth bust to some extent. You'll have all seen, I should think, about 6 years ago now, there was a big story because the WHO, the World Health Organization, came out and effectively said that if we eat things like bacon, sausages and ham, they cause cancer. So we shouldn't eat them, you know, these are bad things. And the bit of information that got put out there all the time is that 50 grams of processed meat per day, so less than 2 slices of bacon, increase the chances of developing colorectal cancer or bowel cancer by 18%. Now, as a person who's had cancer twice, cross fingers, I'm absolutely fine now, but you know, cross fingers, I'm never going to belittle the effects or the massive harm from cancer. But again, we have to put this into context, because to anybody who was anti-meat, you know, everyone was jumping up and down. See, you shouldn't be eating meat, it's going to kill you, it's all bad, you know, it's really nasty, going to give you cancer, etc., etc. We've got to put that into context. And yes, an 18% increase in risk is highly significant, you know, that sounds really, really frightening. Except, again, in context, bear this in mind. The average person who doesn't have a family history of bowel cancer has a risk of 5% of getting bowel cancer in the future. If there's an 18% risk, so if, as suggested by the report, you eat your 2 pieces of processed meat per day and don't do anything else to counteract that, for example, a high fiber diet, maintaining a healthy weight, you know, exercising, not drinking too much, not smoking, etc., etc., etc. But if we can assume that simply by eating 2 pieces of processed meat, you get this 18% risk, then your average risk goes up from 5% to 6%. Or to put it the other way around, there's still a 94% risk of not getting bowel cancer in the future. So again, not to downplay, but again, when we put these things into context, what we see in the headlines as this is really bad, you shouldn't do it, perhaps becomes a little bit less frightening. And as a side note, yes, that is a hot cross bun with bacon and cheese, and it was amazing. So with that, very lastly, just some tips in terms of how we talk about this with people, because, you know, social media has taken over compared to when I was at university, you know, a certain amount of time ago when these things didn't exist. You know, we talk and we communicate and we share information in such a different way now than we did in the past. And the most important, no matter who you're talking to, is to share your values. So as a butcher, as a person who cares about animal welfare, as someone who works in the meat industry, as a parent, as a rugby player, as a person who lives in Oxfordshire, as a whatever it is that defines you, this is why I feel passionate about this. You know, this is why I think it's important. And the second thing is to be as positive, as polite and as personal on the internet as you would in person, or as you hopefully would be in person. You know, we've all seen the people who rant on Twitter or who are really rude and are trolls on Instagram or Snapchat or anywhere else. You know, we've got to be the better people. We've got to keep it calm. We've got to keep it personal. Sometimes we have to agree to disagree. And people will always have questions, and I'm well aware that I've bombarded you with information. But when people outside the industry have questions, you know, keep it short, keep it simple, give them the opportunity to then ask, okay, I now understand about that, but what about this? You know, try not, as I have probably done, to just throw everything at them and keep them talking for 45 minutes until they go, okay, that's enough, I can't take it anymore. And focus on the important. I have a bit of a reputation for fighting with the anti-meat and dairy people on Twitter and so on. You know, we're not going to win those arguments. No one's going to convince me that I shouldn't eat cheese. You know, even my cat is called cheese, you know, that's not going to change. nor am I going to convince the person who thinks that meat is murder that actually it's fine and it's really good. But there's a whole skew of people out there, most people who just want their questions answered and just want to be reassured that they're making the right choices by choosing milk, meat and eggs. And finally, as I say, sometimes walk away, you know, close the computer, put down your phone, end the conversation, just as you would if somebody was being abusive or unpleasant in person. You know, we don't always have to answer every question. We don't always have to respond to every single point that's made to us. So with that, it really has been a pleasure to talk to you. You've got my email address here, and there's a copy of this presentation as a PDF at the link right there, and I can always send it to Claire as well for dissemination to all. And I'm really happy to answer any questions that you've got now, but also any questions that you think of in, you know, a day, 2 weeks, 2 years, whatever it might be. I'm on Twitter, so that's also an easy way to get hold of me. But as I say, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure talking to you, and I'm going to stop sharing to allow us to look at the chat. So thank you so much.
Wow, Jude, that is absolutely fabulous. I think probably there's been several questions about whether or not the presentation is going to be shared. So I can say that safely that is going to be the case, and we can all go away with things from this that we can use in our conversations that a lot of us have about the sector we work in, and actually it's actually almost a bit of a positive breeze of relief to have sort of these messages when, as you say, we are bombarded often with negative messages about animal product consumption. So I really thank you, and I really thank you for the passion that you've conveyed in this. So I can see that the chat is mostly saying thank you about how informative it is, and somebody's mum was here as well. Liz's mum was with her as well, and she thought it was very informative. Well, that's what more can you ask for? So I think probably now is a great time to open the floor for questions, and if anybody wants to put a question in the chat, that's a great way of doing it, but it's equally just as good if people want to raise their hand and ask a question, and that there is a raise hand function in Zoom. It's in the reactions box, and it's the bottom and it says raise hand. So if I see any raised hands, then please unmute. Otherwise, if I don't see any raised hands, please try and unmute in an orderly fashion, should that be possible.
Claire, I've unmuted, and it's not a question so much as a huge thank you, Jude. You have just provided something. I don't engage on Twitter or social media, but I meet with a lot of people. You all do. You sit down at a party, at a cocktail, you know, around a table, and you get the what do you do, and you say what you do, and you just kind of duck these days because you just feel. And you know, the only story that I've ever had is the one that you alluded to. What are we going to do with the Welsh mountains? We can't grow crops on them, you know, so do we just leave them barren, or do we put sheep on them? But you've just given me some amazing data and facts. I loved your one about taking a flight. You know, I just think things like that. And you're right, you don't want to get into an argument, but it's really hard sometimes to defend your position.
Yeah.
And because I don't feel I have the data. So you've just given me some great data, which I'm really happy about. The other thing I just wanted to ask you, you touched on Veganuary or Veganuary. Who funds that? I sometimes wonder whether as an industry, you've heard it said so many times, I've heard it said so many times, there's a lot of data and information out there, but as an industry, we're not necessarily good at sharing.
That's a really good question about Veganuary. As I understand it, and this is, you know, I take that as you will, it was a sort of grassroots movement from a couple in the States who then published a book and sort of geared up everybody. I presume, because I haven't signed up to it for fairly obvious reasons, I presume there's some kind of cost to signing up, even if it's fairly nominal. But they've done the publicity really well, and their costs, of course, are almost nothing because they don't have to pay anything to just tell people to give up meat and have a couple of nice infographics. So interestingly, the two people who set it up walked away from it this year, I think, with a sort of, we want to do other things and, you know, have time with our family, etc., 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 etc. So whether it had just got too big and become a bit sort of corporate for what they intended. But there's no obvious, I would sort of, in a conspiracy theory sort of way, I would like it if I could say, aha, it's funded by Greenpeace, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, and, you know, somebody else. But as far as I've seen, it isn't. I think it was genuinely set up by some people who thought I think, that they were doing a good thing. They just were a little misinformed about, you know, whether it was good or not.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you, Jude. I see that Dave had his hand up, but he's also put his hand down now. So I don't know whether that means that Margaret's answered all of his questions.
Well, Margaret touched on it, and Jude, we're delighted you're going to become a liveryman. You're going to be a fantastic asset for us. And I'm just sort of a bit on Margaret's tone, really, is what's your view? And it's this big question around, we seem to be a bit of an unorganised and disjointed bunch, the meat trade, or the livestock trade for sure. How do you think, you know, we can start sort of redressing the balances with some of those facts, which are just unbelievable, really, and you know, would be great as an industry to get out there to counter some of these other arguments? How do you feel we can get there or action that?
It is so tricky, isn't it? Because as you say, like, I mean, when I talk about beef farms in the UK, I say there are as many beef systems in the UK as there are beef farms in the UK. We are so fragmented, we are so disjointed. Obviously, often the suckler farmer doesn't actually know where his calves are, you know, 18 months down the line. We do need some kind of leadership and some kind of easy portal, website, whatever it might be, to go to for facts. I know that NFU Dairy, for example, put together a really nice sort of pack on facts and figures related to dairy. And it's really good, but it's sort of a 20-page PDF with a lot of text in it. So it's difficult to, we almost need postcards that we have in our wallets, or think, oh, we could have an app. We could have a phone app, couldn't we, where we could literally pull up. We need infographics, we need little clever things that look cool. If you look on some of the Instagram things for the sort of vegan campaigns and the Meatless Mondays, their pictures and their little cartoons and things are beautiful, you know, and we can go so far with a picture of a really good looking steak, but they've gone further in just really creative, zingy little bits that really get people's attention. I wish I had a really good answer to who's best placed to lead this, of course, apart from the worshipful company of butchers. But I think everybody's asking the same question and sort of wondering who's going to jump up and say, yes, it's us. I mean, perhaps it is us. And perhaps that's the point, because we do have that breadth of people from all across the industry. Whereas NFU, for example, AHDB, for example, yes, they're meat, but they're also dairy, they're also potatoes, they're also, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So it's difficult to sort of get them to just focus on one commodity, possibly to the disadvantage of others. I think we have a huge opportunity if we gear people up, and I think empowering them with the data and the messages. If you don't know what you're going to say going into a conversation, you automatically feel disadvantaged. And the one thing that the activist groups do really well, I presume this is through emails, they literally send out, these are the messages, you know, 6 points. And if something happens on Twitter, you'll see people posting the same things over and over and over again. You know, yeah, but what about dairy bull calves? Yeah, but what about, and it's almost like they've been pre-programmed. And it gets tedious, but they're really good at getting all those messages out to a massive amount of people. And we need to be able to do that. Like this week's message is, most of our land can't be used for anything else but grazing and livestock. Go, you know, post a picture, post a tweet, put a beautiful picture of a steak. You know, your challenge is this week, you do something about this on social media. Next week, we're going to look at byproduct feeds. The week after, we're going to look at traceability, you know. I get too passionate about this, don't I?
We've got a desk at Worshipful Company Butcher's office. Oh,
Sorry, Dave, we haven't.
I'm sorry, Carl, we haven't. I'm sorry.
I would say though, Jude, that I do think with the United Nations Food Security Summit and with COP26, I generally feel there is a wind of change blowing through. You've got things like the Global Alliance now, you've got the IMS, and this is not a UK problem, this is a global issue. And I just sense there is a wind of change now, that we're coming together to try and get off the back foot. And there is some great stuff out there. And I'm just going to say, if I may, Claire, one criticism: I'm not a young butcher, and I've found this absolutely fascinating. I'm sure we've got lots of liverymen out there that would enjoy watching this recording that don't consider themselves young.
Well, it's a good job we've recorded it, and we probably need to make sure that we promote it through our social media channels to get people to just have half an hour to listen to the messages. I mean, you could listen to it in the bath. I see Steve listening to it at the pub, even better. So there's nowhere you can't listen to Jude speak. And I think the amount of information, Jude, you managed to pack in that space of time that has clearly resonated with people is amazing. I can see, well, it's Carla who's got her hand
me.
as well. Yes, and I can also see that Bill has just raised a hand as well. So I'll go to you first, Carla.
Okay. I'm just interested, you showed the infographic of the 2 cows, and 3 months, slaughtering them 3 months earlier made that difference. Is that something that was just research, or is that something that's being implemented, or a guidance? What's come from that?
Good question. So the intention of it was to stop and make people think a little bit, because a 2 or 3 month difference can be done by just doing everything better all the way through the animal's life. So if the NBA had gone, we want to cut the age from 28 months to 16 months, that would involve like massive changes in feed and housing and breeding and so on and so on. A 2 to 3 month difference can just be by doing everything a little bit better. And there are a lot of beef farmers out there who are doing exactly that. So to be honest, we did come under fire from people who said, I finish at 30 months, I can't possibly get them done in 27 or 28 months. But we also had an awful lot of people saying, I'm finishing cattle on grass at 23 or 24 months, and I'm not doing anything mind-blowingly different. I'm just paying attention to what I do and looking at my data, looking at my cattle weights, looking at their carcasses, and just doing everything better. And I think my main message from a research point of view is that on any beef, sheep, pig operation, if we look at the numbers and we look at the data and we look at how we're doing compared to other farmers, compared to UK benchmarks, we can always do things better.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Carla. And just to add on to Jude's point, it's an increasing body of evidence that is being gathered from various different organisations, and in the UK, talking about health and welfare and actually managing the health and welfare of animals, reducing their disease burdens, and that can have a major impact on things like the ages that Jude's talking about. So doing things better in terms of their systems, looking at the numbers, but also just making the animals healthier. It's not to say they're unhealthy now, but to manage some of the sort of the unseen things that perhaps don't have a major effect. Fantastic. I can see that Bill put his hand up, so I'll hand over to you, Bill.
Thank you, Claire. Yes, it's fascinating, Jude, really interesting. And I love your idea of having perhaps a weekly or a monthly fact to send out to people. And would be very happy to use our Institute of Meat membership and our 1,200 odd butchery apprentices. We could send the messages out to lots and lots of people, and I'd be happy to get involved with that.
That would be amazing. Thank you. That'd be so cool.
Fantastic. Can I ask if there's any questions coming from our younger butchers that are on the call too? Thanks very much for that comment, Bill, and I think it's great to join forces. Have we got anyone from young butchers that wants to comment? I know that there was at least one person on the call who had a particular academic interest in South American beef systems as well, and I don't want to put them on the spot, but if anybody from the younger butchers has got any comments, that'd be really great if they want to add them.
Hello, hi.
Hello.
I was just arriving back from work. I've been listening in the car on the way home, but no, really interesting. I've just finished my master's looking at beef in South America, particularly if there's anything that us here in the UK can learn. But no, really interesting presentation. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. And actually, just to sound all important, we literally just published a paper on productivity in South American beef. It
Wow.
came out yesterday. I'll put it on my Twitter later on. So
definitely. I'd be really interested.
It is a bit. It's actually looking at implant use, but the same trends would be there from doing anything that improves productivity. So yeah.
Oh wow, that sounds really interesting.
That later.
Oh, thank you.
I don't have a question, but I just wanted to say I'm sat here with my mum, who's from a non-farming background, nothing to do with agriculture or farming or food or anything. And we both just really enjoyed that and really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today. So thank you very much.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, Liz, and thank you to everybody for being here. I'm conscious we've come up to the hour now, and although we did start a few minutes late because of the issue with which meeting we were in, if there's still an opportunity for a few more comments. I know Margaret has already expressed her thanks as master, but I'm sure she'll want to say a bit more before the end of the meeting, and we probably want to plug a few more of the Young Butchers events, but please don't feel that this is the end of the questions. So if there's any more to come, don't hold back.
I just have a question. Hiya. Sustainability using the whole carcass. Have you seen anything in America towards the pushing on the cuts that perhaps get exported to the Far East or anything like that? So we really are being sustainable as we possibly can.
Oh, that's a really good question. And we've certainly seen, haven't we, from a consumer basis, that there's more interest in sort of things that we wouldn't necessarily have thought of 10 and 20 years ago. I mean, if we just look at how much pork belly seems to be everywhere nowadays, whereas, not so much in the past. In the States, not really. There's still a big focus on prime cuts, basically, and steaks and some ground beef, and yeah, they have very good export markets, but I think that whole concept of sort of nose to tail eating has an awful lot of mileage in it. I just wish we could get more people to think more about it. I think an awful lot of consumers become frightened because they don't necessarily know what to do with anything but mince and steaks, for example. And they go, well, I don't know what I do with a lamb's heart or some tripe or whatever it might be. So we really have some opportunities there if we can get, and I didn't touch on this in the presentation, but just as we are lemmings to some degree with the things we think about, we tend to follow famous people. So all we need is a Jamie Oliver or whoever it might be to publicize these things, and all of a sudden everybody's doing it. I always go back to the it sort of dates me a little bit, but about 20 years ago or so, Delia Smith talked about a particular type of omelette pan on her program, and like overnight they went into overproduction and sold out, etc., etc. If we could do that with all of the organ meats, all of the things that we don't necessarily eat on a day-to-day basis, again, that would have huge legs for sustainability, pardon the sort of pun, but I don't think we're there yet, unfortunately. We need more people pushing it.
Can I just join that conversation? May I say, Simon, Carcass Balance. So Yes, I'm the master of the Worshipful Company of Butchers, but I'm also chairman of something called the International Meat Trade. And Carcass Balance is the message that we have been putting to government for the last, I don't know how many years. People out there think we eat lambs. They have no concept of the fact that we eat 6 legs for every bit of the rest of the carcass. We don't eat nose to tail. And Jude, I don't know whether we're ever going to turn that clock back.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's going to have to be free trade agreements and export markets. And if you look at the NFU report that came out last week on food security, they're on board. They know we need imports, but they're saying we also need exports. And that's the only way you're really going to get Carcass Balance. And it worries me because I don't think anybody's listening in terms of government. I think you understand it, but I don't think government get it.
No, I think you're right. It's really tricky.
Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you, and thank you for all of the comments. And Margaret has a point that we probably do live in we're in a global market anyway now, and our carcass balance is perhaps achieved globally rather than nationally. Whether or not that's a good place for it to be or not, it's perhaps the reality. It's the future of the livestock industry in the UK.
I've just interestingly, Claire, and I just noticed today we've signed that the Americans are going to let UK lamb in again today. So that's an eye opener because their French rack price will beat anything in the world. So that's what we've got to do. You know, we've got to look at maximising our values by putting cuts like French racks, which are used here, but not at the prices that the States markets are paying. So that'll be an interesting development.
I just worry, Dave, that that's an agreement in principle and that the veterinary side has not been signed off.
It will take 2 years, I suspect.
Yes, that's what worries me. But yeah. You know, I'll say it again, and I think it was said brilliantly by Liz. Thank you, Liz, and brilliantly. It was fantastic. And Claire, thank you so much for bringing it all together and making it happen, because I know that's not easy to do. And Jude, it was brilliant. And it's great to see so many people on it at 5 o'clock in the evening when you should all be going home or going to the pub or whatever. So no,
Steve's in the pub.
Yeah.
Hey, not just Steve.
Well, not you as well.
Well done, Donna. Well done.
Well done, Donna.
Hold up the side.
I think it was great, and I love the concept of, you know, what was it used to say, eat an apple a day. If we can find a strap line, not necessarily a day, but if we can come up with a message on a weekly or a monthly basis and really blitz social media with it, I think that's a great shout.
Absolutely. Thank you, Margaret. I wish we'd had a bit more time for me to ask you, Jude, about how we look towards the next generation of food consumers and food manufacturers, since we're here talking with the young butchers. But I am very conscious that if people haven't already gone home, they might be on the way home. But I can see that Steve's just put his hand up. Better late than never, Steve.
Perhaps he's going to buy us a drink.
Yeah, bring us all the drink next time we're in the city. So over to you, Steve. You're on mute.
I do think we need to be a lot more export orientated. We don't export half as much of the carcass as we should do. You look at some of the other countries' models. Canadian pork, they export 70%. You know, we need to be a lot more outward looking, is my humble opinion.
Thank you, Steve. And it's certainly true. If we can't find a market at home domestically, or that's going to take years for it to happen, there's certainly ways in which we can support ourselves in the meantime. Just very quickly, and it's not a 5-second answer, but how do you think we talk to the future generation of food consumers, Jude, and perhaps people in the food industry, and get everybody on the same hymn sheet?
I think we have to start really early. I live in a relatively rural village in South Oxfordshire. We've got a sheep farm in the village. and both the local preschool and the local primary school in non-COVID times visit that farm every year at lambing, and they talk about it for months. I mean, the first time my daughter went, she would have been about 2.5, 3, and she came home, she said, "Mummy, there was a ewe and a lamb, and the lamb came out of the mummy's bottom, and it was disgusting, it's covered all this stuff, but it was amazing." And and she talks about that all the time, and now she asks questions about the cattle that she sees in the field and the sheep and everything else. And if we can just get that interest going, to be fair to the States, in the rural areas, they have really good food programs, 4-H programs for sort of rural kids. We need more food information, food education. Certainly when I was in school, it was, you'll do some domestic science and you'll learn to bake a cake. And that was, all we did. But there's so much interest in it, particularly from the younger generation. I have 2 nieces, age, what are they now, 9 and 11 or 10 and 12, and they Instagram, every thing they eat almost, oh, look at this cake, oh, look at this. We can take advantage of that and just draw them in early rather than waiting until 15, 16, 17 or older. So I think we really need good education, good presence in schools, and for farmers and butchers and processors and e-tailers to go into schools, to talk to teachers as well, just about our food system and get people interested and excited about it early.
Thank you, Jude. That actually sort of answered a lot of what I was going to say, was that we need to help the adults have the conversations with the children, because it's fine for you, we were in an exceptionally well-informed position, and of course you're going to inspire and enthuse as much as I try to do the same, but for a lot of adults, they might feel ill-equipped. I mean, we watched an advert for Alexa on the TV, and he doesn't know where Mount Vesuvius is, and he has to ask Alexa about it. So we need to have those messages for teachers, for adults, so that they can have those conversations with their children.
Definitely.
Thank you. And I really don't want to draw it to a close, but I know that people probably either have journeys to make home, or pubs to run to, having been inspired by Steve and Donna. So I just want to say thank you ever so much for joining. Apologies for the technical hitch at the beginning, but I don't think it's hindered us in what's been absolutely fantastic as a young butcher and older butchers meeting. And we're all part of the same family. So I'm really grateful, Jude, for your time, and we look forward to seeing you at many, many more events, and hopefully we will get the chance to sort of do some more work with you with the young butchers, particularly through your role at Harper Adams as well, and linking up with processes like ABP. So you're not going to get away from it very easily, even if you wanted to. So thank you. So I'm just going to hand over to Dave momentarily, because Dave's just going to sort of flag up a few more young butchers events, and then we'll go to close, and I'll just let our master say a final few words after Dave.
Yeah, just very quickly, we're myself and Claire heads up Young Butchers, and she's a great asset for us, and we're working together within the recruitment team and other committees to get a full and varied list of Young Butcher events this year. So dates for your diary, they're not exclusive YB events, the next 2, but they'll be interesting to join together, I think, and we'll get a lot out of. 12th of October is actually a lunchtime lunch bite, on a virtual lunch bite with Catherine Hainault, who's the trading director of Marks and Spencer's, and she's being interviewed by Pam Brooke, who's the former editor of Meat Management. So that will be a good session to join. That's from 12:30 to 1:30 on the 12th of October. And not a lot of detail out on this, but this will be a big event. And I know Margaret has been very keen to develop this one. We're having our first Worshipful Company of Butchers City Meat Lecture on the 11th of November, and it will be an evening event. Details will be submitted, but it will be a not to miss event. I think there will be virtual, it will be an in-person event, but I think we will have some virtual capability as well. So just those couple of dates for your diaries. Myself and Claire have got to work out December, but I think it'll probably involve a pub, hopefully.
Better late than never. Thanks, Dave. And I'll just pass over to our master, Margaret, for some final comments.
Thank you very much, Claire. And yeah, Dave, I really am very enthusiastic about the City Meat Lecture, the title of which is The Place of Meat in the National Diet, the rightful place of meat in the national diet. I think I'm winging it. But I think it's going to be really interesting. And I would just explain, although it's organised by the livery, it is open to everybody. So it's going to be a live event. I'm not sure we've got virtual as well, have we, Carla?
Sorry, what was the question?
Sorry, Dave said he thought we'd got virtual. We were going to have a hybrid, but I understood it was a physical event. That was all I.
It's physical.
It is a physical event, yeah. But you're right, Dave. It's one not to be missed. I think it'll be really good. But just yet again, I can't tell you. You've given me such great things. I was taking photographs of the screen because I know I can go back and look at it, but helps if they're on my phone. And I just, as I say, I love that one about flying to Australia and flying to France. You should always take the train to France anyway. You know, that's the right way to go. But Jude, it was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much for finding the time to do this. And as I say, yet again, Claire, great. And can you just make sure I get invited to all the Young Butchers events, even though I'm not a young butcher, please?
I think de facto you're there, Margaret. Thank you very much. And thank you everybody for attending. Thank you so much for all of the questions, and thank you once again, Jude, for your time. And I hope everyone has a good evening and the weekend as it comes quite rapidly down the road.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks.
Take
Bye,
care,
guys.
everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.